So I want to thank you all again for getting together. I really enjoy the times that we have when we discuss and share our faith journey together. So this is the week that the Supreme Court actually went ahead and overrode Roe v. Wade. And then they made a decision that a football coach can lead his team in prayer. And they said that New York State should not tell people that they can't conceal their weapons. So we've got a court that, any one of those things would be a little radical. And one of their decisions said they told us what what they've got up next, which is marriage equality and birth control and private intimate relations. So I feel like, our church, the ELCA, our bishop shared our message, and from 1991, I think a lot of people maybe would have thought about something different to say than what we said in 1991. So for me, I feel like at the very least, a Christian should be able to stand up and say that there's something a little too radical and reactionary about this court. And we know that there are people who sincerely believe in something that they call the sanctity of life. But even if you believe that, abortion should be regulated, or even if you believe abortion should be banned, there's something about this court and its methods. The very idea that, Mitch McConnell packed this court, he told Barack Obama he wasn't going to get to appoint a Supreme Court justice. And the way in which all of these justices lied to us, we all sat down to watch those confirmation hearings. And whether you were, on their side of things or on the opposite side, everyone wanted to know the answer to one question.
Mm-hmm.
They could have started with that question, asked it once, and then sent everybody home. Everybody wanted to know, do you respect Roe v. Wade as a settled precedent? Or are you just dying to get enough people on there to overturn it? And they all said they respected it as settled precedent. They lied to us. And we kind of knew that they were lying, because Reagan and Bush and Trump all said that they were going to appoint justices who would overturn Roe. But, if they had said that in the confirmation hearings, they would not have been confirmed, as we know from Robert Bork, who did not get confirmed. So they lied. So there's something about the way in which this court has been packed, the way in which the membership on this court are people who were not truthful about what they were going to do once they got on the court for their lifetime position. And the other thing I think that Christians should be able to say is that if you want to stand up and say you don't believe in same-gender marriage, if you want to stand up and say you think abortion is wrong, don't use Jesus. Jesus didn't say anything about abortion. And Jesus didn't say anything about same-gender marriage, and Jesus didn't say anything about birth control. And, these people have convinced everybody that this is all Jesus cared about. That this is, every Catholic and every other Christian who goes to a church that's conservative is told, don't vote for people who are pro-life, who are pro-choice. Don't vote for people who are pro-choice because that's evil. And they're not told about how to vote on any other issue. It's the one litmus test. It's the one litmus test for who the Republicans appoint to the Supreme Court and other judges. It's the one litmus test that some preachers tell their members to vote on. And it's the one thing that will get you banned from communion. There are bishops who say, oh, don't give politicians communion if they're pro-choice. So the way in which this is, the entirety of what Jesus would have cared about right now. So the divisiveness and the disingenuousness of this radical reactionary movement, I think there's limits on what preachers can say. I don't think we should stand up and tell people how to vote. And I think we should be careful about saying that everybody should agree with us on this issue or any other issue, because we want our churches not to be red or blue, but to be purple. And we don't want to, push people away because they don't adhere to a certain political point of view. But I do feel like there's something scary and reactionary and radical about this court. So at the very least, I think maybe Christians should be able to say that. At most, I think we can point out that, the impact of these decisions is going to fall on some people more than it falls on other people. And, there are, Christians and Catholics and others who've said that they believe abortion is violence, but they see it as a whole cycle of violence.
Mm-hmm.
That women are denied basic rights, and that's a cycle of violence, and that sometimes women who don't have childcare and don't have legal protections, it's a part of that cycle of violence, and that we're just going to focus on the one part where the woman is going to be punished, as opposed to a system that's putting her in a place where she can't have options and make decisions. That decisions are kind of made for a person who is trapped in a situation where they don't have options. I kind of think it really, to be pro-life and to say, we're okay with child poverty, we're okay with kids in cages. That just has to be seen as being disingenuous. And to me, that's something that should be able to be preached, I guess.
I think that the Christian stance, first of all, there is no single Christian stance, but we live in a pluralistic context, not in a theocracy, or at least we should not live in a theocracy. And this ruling imposes one very narrow religious point of view on the nation. And I don't trust, even though we live in New York where things will remain status quo, I don't trust that that the states that have not yet enacted severe restrictions will refrain from doing so, or that there will not be a move to ban it nationally. I mean, the politicians are already talking about it, but all of this kind of brought to mind for me, what is the Christian stance? And I remember in the 90s, I worked for an ecumenical church organization, Church Women United, which had 38 different church-affiliated groups associated with it. Some were Protestant, mainline Protestant churches from the historic Black church traditions, Orthodox, some Orthodox churches. We even had what at that time were called the Reorganized Church of Latter-day Saints, which is now the Communities of Christ, which see themselves as a mainline denomination, as apart from the more traditional LDS, and Roman Catholic women. And one of the things that I was tasked with as a communications director was to draft a policy, because the organization had no policy on abortion, precisely because there were so many divergent points of view among those distinct Christian traditions. So I was tasked with writing one that essentially was a policy of no policy, that referred people back to their families, to their pastors, their faith communities, and their medical professionals. But this would have been prior to 1999, and that's still in some corners of our affiliated denominational groups to say, no, this is a decision that women make prayerfully within the context of their beliefs and within the context of their family and their needs. Even that was not enough. People still said, you don't have a policy on abortion because a policy on abortion means coming out and saying that it's wrong. So it's and I think that that's emblematic. I think that of painting Christians with that wide brush, that you have to believe this way, rather than recognizing that women and their families have moral agency, that our bodies are created in the divine image, and we have been given the ability to make these kinds of painful or not decisions about our bodies. Roe v. Wade was, the ruling was in 1973, which was my freshman year in college. So my adult life has had Roe v. Wade in it. And I think of people that I have known throughout that time, women who I know who have tried to have children and who have had multiple miscarriages that required what we would call something under the abortion umbrella in order to be able to get past that experience and try again. Some women never conceive even after multiple miscarriages that require medical intervention, and some women do, but so many of those procedures would be considered wrong. I think that also about all of the young girls that I knew in high school, in my Catholic high school, where we started out with a class of 180 in the fall of 1968, and probably lost a good 20 or 25 of those to pregnancy. Starting in freshman year, girls who never were able to finish out their high school years, who were never able to, I mean, perhaps they went back later on, but who essentially had their youth taken from them because there were no other options. And I think, having children is a choice. I feel that the children that I brought into this world were chosen. I wanted them, and it's not that I was obligated to have them. I made a choice to have them, and that choice has to work both ways. Personally, I'm a strong believer that life begins very early on in the process. And that's because one of my children, I could feel moving at around 11 weeks. The quickening came at around 11 weeks. So that convinced me that yes, life begins, but what kind of life is it? And when does the personhood that we talk about really come into being? And for me, that's associated with breath, with ruach, with God breathing breath in order to bring about life. So I have a personal tension there with those two things. But I think that our role as people of faith is serving purple churches, for the most part, is really to create a safe space to have these conversations. We can't not have these conversations. They have to be named.
I think it's a good point that, the decision needs to be with the woman, and so there are people who say that women should not be allowed to use abortion as birth control. So what they're saying is they don't want abortions to be casual. And what the implication of that is that you want to force women to have pregnancies go full term. So the logic is that, there are women who are having abortions casually, which I don't think anybody knows anybody who does that.
No.
And that's a very kind of a very, contemptuous view of women, to think that women, men don't know what it's like to carry a child, and to imagine that women are having abortions casually. But even just to allow that, maybe there's one woman somewhere who is having a casual abortion, maybe there's someone who, that's the case. One person someplace, maybe that's the case, theoretically. You want to force that person to become a mother. You think you're doing that, the child is going to come from that pregnancy a favor by making sure that that mother is forced to have that child. So the crazy thinking that, women are having casual abortions, how does that lead to the idea that we should force them? The kind of thinking is just abstract. It's not about people that they know and situations that people face. They're just kind of abstracting and saying we need a ban on behavior of people who are doing wrong things.
Yeah.
But is it really abstract though? Is it really abstract? I mean, we need to talk about the elephant in the room, right? And which is white supremacy and racism.
Yes.
And so, like you say, they want to ban women from having casual sex, but yet Viagra is federally funded, and men can have casual sex, and get it federally funded, get a prescription, get it paid for. But women who have casual sex with these men who are allowed to have casual sex, in turn, cannot have a casual abortion. And so why is that, right? And so Jane Elliott talked about white supremacy, right? And that the issue with abortion is that the white supremacists find their numbers dwindling, and they want to bring their numbers up. And the only way you can do it is if white women have babies, right? And so we don't want to talk about the elephant in the room, which is the issue for most of these decisions that the Supreme Court is making. And the problem is we don't want to discuss the ugliness of how this country was made and built.
Well, I think that it is an issue of radicalization. I think a lot of people have been pointing out that when George Washington, a slave owner, a white supremacist, and all the rest, but when he was talking about the three branches of government, he said that the only thing that's really going to require this to work or enable it to work is through moderation and restraint on each parts of the government. And when you get into a situation where restraint is thrown to the winds, where government has become radicalized, where it has become under the control of a white supremacist minority, which, because of the strange way our system is organized, can get most of the power with the least amount of votes, and that those of us who live in areas of the country where we would just be appalled by this lack of choice, and this lack of freedom, and this lack of opportunity to govern our own bodies and our own families and that kind of thing, have kind of lost the power. I did a cartoon yesterday that was inspired by the coach who was allowed to pray on the 50-yard line. Is that what it was? And a lot of people interpreted the cartoon. I talked about the collapse of the wall of separation of church and state. At least one person thought that this was a commentary on the cancellation of Roe v. Wade. It was not intended as such, but one of the people who criticized that said that the issue of Roe v. Wade has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with the 10th Amendment, which said that the federal government should not preempt or take over what is the just and right responsibility of the states. I think that is kind of a propaganda message that is being set out. Of course, Roe v. Wade has everything to do with religion. It has everything to do with conservative Catholic and white evangelical religion. And there are a lot of religions that do not believe that life begins at conception. And one wishes that there was some way we could remind our brothers and sisters all over the nation that government was not intended to be radical. Government was not intended to control the life forces of the people. It was intended to provide safety and moderation. And I think we've drifted a long way from that hopeful ideal.
There was one Twitter post about, what would our founders think about today? And it said, the founders looking at it today would be, what do you mean there are Catholics on the Supreme Court?
Yes.
Exactly.
And Jews and women.
Yeah.
They would be appalled. They would be.
Yep.
Exactly.
So
And I think the dumbing down of America,
Yeah.
not teaching civics, not teaching history, not teaching why the pilgrims and the settlers came to the Americas, why they developed a constitution, why they felt they needed to have a constitution, is not being taught in our schools. And so you want to talk about, the separation of church and state is so important. It's so important, the separation of church and state. And I was a student who individually prayed in school, and people knew that. They knew I was a Christian, I was involved in activities, and I was a person who prayed. But did I want prayer in schools? No, because I didn't want my teachers praying over me, because their ideals were not the same as mine. And so people just don't get it, that we have to theologically teach the people the truth. We can't be afraid to teach what free will really means. That if God and Jesus did not take away the free will of humanity. How dare humanity do that to each other? That's biblical, right? We have to teach that there is a mention of abortion in the Bible, right? In Numbers, right? Where God says that if the woman has been unfaithful, you go in this water, and if she is pregnant, the child will be aborted. It will be miscarried, right? But that's a form of abortion, am I not right? And so that's God sanctioned, right? But these evangelicals and these Republicans have a white supremacist agenda, and that has to be called out, right? And it has to be called out of the people of color who buy into it as well. And why do they buy into it? It has to be called out. It's bad theology. It's institutionalism gone corrupt. And we have to call that out. We can't be afraid to say that within the churches. And there has to be a stance. The stance on abortion doesn't have to be whether you like it or not. People have the right to do what they choose to do. God never took that away from the people. Jesus never took that away from the people. And if we can't, say that enough, God never took the rights of the people away from the very beginning. He never took their rights away, right? And so Jesus comes, and Jesus doesn't do it either. And Jesus doesn't, Jesus said. Half the things that people are saying that Jesus said, Jesus never said, right? So we have to do good Bible study, good theological teaching, right? And then also, we have to be practical. I grew up in a church, and my pastor, when I was growing up, his undergraduate degree was in marketing. Right? And so he knew how to deliver the message in a way that people could get, that applied to their everyday living. And he developed a church that served the community. Was I always in agreement with some of his politics? No, but he served the community, and he was never one to teach against free will. And so why do we sit back and just let things happen? And so we have to teach the people in the community. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, but I'm going to tell you theologically how to go into the voting booth. I'm going to teach you that, right? That when you go into the voting booth, if you say you're a Christian, if you are a follower of Christ, then you should not be going into the voting booth trying to wield power over somebody else because they're not a Christian, because Jesus didn't do that.
So Christian preachers and Christian leaders could be speaking up for separation of church and state, and
That's
saying
right.
that this is a violation of church and state.
That's right.
And I also feel like it's a violation of Christianity. We should be saying, that people who are presenting Christianity this way are violating the teachings of Christ. Martha, were you going to say something?
No, I'm just really glad that Pastor Stephanie raised the issue of racism, of white supremacy in this, because we cannot get around that. I mean, that's there at the core of the prayer, the prayer determination. I'd like to see, how communities that are cheering this on are going to respond when there are Islamic prayers, or when there are Jewish prayers, or when there are prayers from other non-Christian communities. But it certainly is there in the Dobbs ruling. And I think one of the most horrifying things to me was that the casualness with which the birthing process has been described, with Supreme Court justices talking about, the domestic supply of infants that's decreasing. Well, yeah, the domestic supply of white infants, because some of that same political party or that same political persuasion, at the same time they were saying these things, were vehemently against infant formula being given to brown babies at the border. So don't go around saying you care about babies. I mean, there are 400,000 plus children in the foster care system. Black children, brown children do not get adopted as easily or as quickly as white children.
Yeah. And can I say, you know, I worked in child welfare for 15 years.
Mhm.
White children don't get adopted so quickly either when they're in the system, right?
Okay.
Because white people who want to adopt children don't want to deal with the system and to go through what you have to go through to get these kids, right? So you got white kids being adopted by people of color. I have it in my own family, right? And so they talk about these things, but it's really just for a minute number of them. And the sad part is there are white people also suffering, but because they buy into this white supremacist mindset, they are cutting off their noses to spite their faces, right? And so racism affects white people just as much. It may be in different ways. And it has infiltrated our politics. You know, I told my brother last night, I said, you know, all of these laws that they want to pass, we all need to take advantage of them, right? When Trump wanted to give back the right to churches to speak politically from the pulpits, even if you had a tax exempt, I was waiting. I said, because I told my pastor, I said, what if that happens? Oh, let me preach every other Sunday, because I'm going to have something to say every other Sunday. Oh, you want prayer on the football field? Let's invite everybody to come pray on the football field. And we know that it's a problem, because when the Black Panthers in the 70s came out with their guns, right? Then we got gun laws. Then we got gun reform, right? So if we started teaching these things, would people start to think? Would people start to think? You know, I saw a meme that said, or off of Twitter, the Satanics now have the right to pray on the field. The Wiccans have the right to pray on the field. And so you're not thinking, right? Because you so.
Yeah. They know they're going to control the process, though. So Trump wanted to have churches become politicized because he knows numerically that will play to his advantage. So I don't know if any of you saw the Texas Republican platform. I think 2 weeks ago, they said in their platform, they wanted to say that Joe Biden was not legitimately elected, that was the state party platform. And they wanted Christianity to be an official religion. They wanted Christianity to be taught. So when they talk about people praying, they know that numerically and otherwise, they're not going to allow that to be free, that they're doing it specifically knowing that they want to control that. So if you have any insight into how evangelicals became so aligned with Republicans?
Well, as most of you know, I'm a recovering Southern Baptist. I had my born again experience when I was in the Air Force. And the evangelicals I knew then were really quite ecumenical. They had wide open views. They could sit down with Catholic and Presbyterian and Methodist chaplains. And I was very much impressed by the zeal of the Southern Baptists. But I began to realize as I went on, became an American Baptist, and had friends who were journalists in the Southern Baptist Convention, that it was a very insular kind of group. They had a lot of rules that I think lead to the decision that we had today, the male supremacy of people in the Southern Baptist Convention. The fact that the women are not allowed to be ordained because they're not called. There are many Southern Baptist women who believe that if they teach Sunday school, they could teach boys, but only up to the age of 12, because then they lose the competency to do that. And if you grow up with this and you don't have a chance to challenge this with something like Roe v. Wade or something like let's everybody pray in school or that kind of thing comes along, you're going to be very difficult to persuade. Martha and I know most of the radical Southern Baptists who women who were ordained, and women and pastors who crusaded for peace and worked for civil rights and that kind of thing. You could probably count them on these hands.
Yep.
We probably knew them all, and evangelicals are looking to control everybody else's situation. Another problem with evangelicals is that they tend to believe that Jesus is coming soon.
Mm.
So there are a lot of things that they feel there's no point in working. Let's outlaw abortion, but let's not worry about the environment. Let's not worry about the air that we're filling with carcinogens and other septic things. Let's not worry about the greenhouse gases that we're putting out, because Jesus is coming and he will wipe all of that away. So this is again an example of a minority of people with enormous political power who are saying things that a lot of industrialists want to hear because they're making money out of this. And yet the rest of us who are affected by it and suspect that the world will continue limping along for many more years and centuries before the Lord finally comes. It's a travesty and a attack on our rights as individuals to live lives of health and peace.
So maybe they're willing to undermine the democratic process and not worry about somebody else using it against them in the future because they don't see the future as something to be planning for.
Well, I think that's part of it. There's also the idea that God accepts it if you lie for a good cause. I encountered this when I was a communicator for the American Baptists, where there were a lot of Southern Baptist influence. And when we heard news that churches in Zaire, now Congo, where we had missions, were asking the American missionaries to go home and let them run their own churches. And we were told by the fundraisers not to report that, because that will certainly it will certainly discourage people from contributing to foreign missions, which is the lifeblood of the Southern Baptists and the American Baptists and all the rest. So there comes a time when lying, if it protects the church, also protects Jesus, and that's what we will do. Southern Baptists have had a long history of lying about the oppression of male pastors, the abuse of male pastors, the abuse of women, and because husbands are at the head of the family, and the wife will do what the husband intends. That doesn't look so good anymore. So the Southern Baptists have a long history of lying about literally hundreds of cases of abuse. And lying is good. And so long as lying is good, it's going to be very difficult to have a dialogue with them.
I feel like a lot of what this radical group is doing is so unpopular, and they make it palatable by lying about Democrats. So that you have Pizzagate, where there are millions of people who are convinced that Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden are communists in a kind of a Stalinist kind of a dictatorial way, and that they are feeding off of the adrenaline of infants. They have these crazy things that are like, the protocols of the Elder of Zion or something. It's really just ghoulish kinds of craziness. And when I watched the confirmation hearings for Ketanji Brown Jackson, and they were accusing her of going easy on pedophiles, I thought, they're gonna misrepresent people based on their gender. They're gonna misrepresent people based on their religion. They're gonna misrepresent people based on their race, and now they're gonna misrepresent people based on their politics. That you can't trust people who are Democrats, that they're evil, that you can't listen to them, that they have this vast conspiracy of selling children and of abusing children.
But this goes back to when Reagan was running, right? Jerry Falwell, right? This is how the evangelicals get aligned with the Republican Party, right? Because and why did that happen? Because they didn't want their children to go to integrated schools, right? But they wanted the government to pay for it. And so the only way you can pay for it is to now align yourself with a political party that says that you could do what you want. And so you lobby that party and you give them all the money and they stand up and they'll do the misrepresenting for you. And so again, it goes back to educating ourselves, right? To looking at history to see how we got here. And even with the Republican Party, it's so funny. We're the party of Lincoln, right? We're the party of Lincoln, but you got to tell the history behind that too, right? And so how did your party get so big and become so racist, right? And that was because Lyndon B. Johnson, the Democratic Party, which was once racist, right? And I still feel a big segment, it still is. But Lyndon B. Johnson votes for the Civil Rights Act. And so you all jump ship and go to the Republicans. So let's tell the truth and shame the devil, It's all about just putting the truth out there. Put the truth out there. And we as leaders in the church who still have the ear of the people, we can't be afraid to teach people the truth. We can't be afraid to present them with the information and then make your decision, right? See how did this really work for you?
In your context, in your current context, is this hard? Is this complicated to talk about this, to have conversations about this?
No, because like what Martha said, it's so far beyond just the abortion piece, right? It is about women's reproductive health. It is about can I get the care that is needed? And not just because I want to have a baby or don't want to have a baby. It becomes an issue with your health and your body. Do I have the right to do what's right for my body? And because in the Black community, that's an issue. That's already an issue outside of abortion. That's already an issue, right? We saw that with COVID. How many people in the Black community and the brown community died because they could not get services, right? How many people in the Black and Browns community are suffering with health issues that could be made better with just nutrition, with just better environment? So we already know that the health issue, the free will of your body is a big deal, right? I myself, when I was a young woman and I had female issues, I had to be put on birth control, not because of sex, but to regulate my period so that I didn't hemorrhage every month, And so if you now pass a law and to make that where I can't get it, it can't be paid for with my health insurance, or I can't get it because it's birth control, that's a problem. That's a problem. And then we also have to talk about abortion that is not about unwanted pregnancies, right? We have to talk about abortion because the child is not going to make it to you. Do you want a woman to carry a dead baby in their body and make them carry that child and deliver that child if she doesn't have to? We have to talk about that. We have to talk about, I counseled a person in the community once who had 3 children. She was married and she had 3 children. But the last child, the doctor told her, do not get pregnant again, because if you get pregnant again, that child could kill you. The last child almost killed her. And so she does get pregnant. Her and her husband are practicing being responsible, but she gets pregnant because nothing is 100% foolproof, right? So now she has to make the decision. Do I have an abortion? Or do I trust God and carry the child to term, right? And so I have to counsel her. Whatever decision you make, God is not going to be any less pleased with you.
Mhm,
God is not going to love you any less,
mhm,
right? Because she had to decide, do I take the chance and my three boys and my fourth child all grow up without a mother,
mhm,
or do I not have this child and be here for my family?
mhm.
And I think, you know,
Why does it have to be now? If would it be illegal for her to even do that, to save her own life?
Mhm.
That's a problem. And so in the Black community, it's not hard. It's not hard because, and it's also not hard because we see where it's coming from. It's racism.
Mhm.
And we're calling it out as it is. It is racism. This is not about Jesus. This is not about the care of children. It's not about that. Look at all the DACA children that have been born in this country, and they won't pass a law for them to stay. Well, not born in the country, but raised in this country. Raised in this country and contribute to this country. Tax money comes from them, right? They work and they contribute to the community. And so, but you don't want to give them legalization. You don't. So do you really care about people?
Mm.
Do you really care about the lives of people? And the answer is no.
Absolutely.
And the answer is no.
And Pastor Stephanie, I mean, you've talked a couple of times about the dumbing down, and I think that we need to teach history. That dumbing down, we also need to teach people to think theologically.
Amen.
Because, you mentioned, carrying a child with no viability or a child that is dead. I mean, people are expecting that somehow a miracle will reverse that, because we've come to think of God as this fairy godmother. That, if we send around enough memes or respond, amen, a blessing will come your way. I mean, it has to start there too.
Right. And we have to teach.
People are just theologically ill-informed.
Amen. And we have to teach where that bad theology comes from, right? That people internalize, oh, I must have done something and God is punishing me. No, that's not how God works.
No.
And we have to teach that. We have to be able to say that is not how God works.
Right.
That is how man works. And and the men who work like that and the people who work like that are doing that for their own personal sick, corrupt, power-filled, power-seeking reasons. We can't be afraid to say that. Right? And we also have to show how science plays a part in this. You understand? And, we're humans. So we have to show people how humanity thrives. Humanity thrives when we work together. Humanity thrives when we're doing the good of the collective, right? And that's Jesus' talk too, right? Because Jesus was a community organizer. So we have to show how those two coincide. If we're not doing that, are we really doing the Christian work?
Amen.
What do you think the next steps are going to be?
I think, as leaders, I tell my friends all the time, we have to create content. We have to create and put stuff in the society, in the air, that speaks to the truth. We have to do PSAs. We have to put stuff out there to say, God loves you. God loves the LGBTQ. God loves women who have had abortions. God loves, it's so funny. God can forgive the infidel man, right? The man who cheats on his wife, the man who beats his wife. God could forgive him, right? But God can't forgive a person who had an abortion. It just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. Make it make sense.
Politician who's voted for it.
And let's do real Bible study, right? And let's do real Bible study. Let's be prepared for the people to come to the Bible study and say, this don't make sense, right? And be open to say, you know what, you're right. And then give them the information behind the text. Let's do that. That's the only way we're going to have real change. And then hold politicians accountable. Teach your congregants to hold folk accountable. That means go to your meetings, go to the hearings, talk about what's happening, sign petitions. It's the only way it's going to change is if we get involved. We can't sit back in our houses and tis and say, oh, it's such a shame, because that's how Jesus got crucified.
Mhm.
That's
lot
how
of-
Jesus
yeah.
got crucified.
There's a lot of Christians who want to say that they're not going to get their hands dirty with politics and they're not going to discuss politics. And they talk about power as a demonic thing. They don't want to claim their power because they don't understand that the way people are abusing power is not the way power is meant to be used. It's not the way in which power was given to us.
Mhm.
I want to thank you all
Thank
again, and
Thank you, Pastor Jim.
let's do this next time when there's not a calamity befalling the democracy.
When will that be, that there are no calamities before?
Right.
These are interesting times.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much. God bless you. Have a good day.
Peace.
Thank you, you too.